welcome to the 50th anniversary of the Preservation Research and Testing Division. It's hard to believe we're 50 years old, and thanks to Hans, who popped into my office last year and said, "Oh, did you know that someone's writing a book and apparently you guys are 50 years old?" So we were pretty excited about that. I wanted to hand over just very briefly to Jake Nadal, who's being pulled between multiple meetings, but wanted to pop in and just say a few words.
Thanks, Vanilla. I won't hold up the proceedings too terribly much, but first, just to say thank you all for being here, and my thanks to everyone who has been involved in this program over the recent years and the last 5 decades. It's, I think, tremendously important that we have this capability. The library's ability to actually do preservation is substantial. We have a large and diverse set of divisions doing the work of keeping the collections accessible. But to have a group here specifically focused at a fundamental level on understanding if we're doing the work of preservation the best way it possibly can be done, to help us think about new methods and new approaches to treatment is essential for doing our work. It also pays this tremendous benefit back to the field. Every year I see presentations being given, not only in venues we would expect, like AIC, but also in other scientific meetings that builds awareness of heritage and cultural preservation in other disciplines, and helps us bring new information to ourselves, as well as oftentimes bring interesting information to allied fields. We just this Saturday actually had a wonderful program on the Glass at Risk project, right? And I think if you had asked me when I walked through the door the first day, how much time do you think you'll be spending about degradation of 19th century crystal flutes? I would say, well, none. That sounds like a Smithsonian kind of thing. And in fact, it turns out to be quite a lot. And we've learned a tremendous amount about not only that material, but one of the library's most distinctive collections. And that's just one example of many where I think our ability to do exploratory research has led us to some really engaging findings, has led us to understand not only how to do the work well, but what the work means. And in fact, the meeting that I am a few minutes late here from, we were just talking about how important the work of preservation is to the whole scholarly purpose of the library, that we can answer questions about fundamental materials that inform the way scholars and users of those materials interpret history and interpret the past. We spoke at a colloquium put together by Dumbarton Oaks last year about the Hueyotzinco Codex and the Ostotikpak lands maps, and research conducted by our conservators and preservation scientists about the pigments used to make those deeply informed the scholarly community about issues of interpretation, informed them about things they had always suspected might be true, but that they could never quite pin down through the record available to them. And so our ability to bring the point of view of a conservator or a scientist to the interpretation and care of these objects, I think, not only helps us keep things available, but expands what available means and how people interpret them. And so I'm glad we have a little time this afternoon to honor that and to give you a chance to hear about the work that's going on in the division. With that, I'll hand it back to the division.
So today, rather than, I could talk for 3 hours about the really cool stuff that we've been doing, and even though I've got a funny accent, I decided that's really not what you want. I want it to be about the amazing staff we have in PRTD. And so really what I'm going to focus on is sort of going through some of the changes that have from then and now, and sort of the new initiatives and the way that's sort of changed and opened up over the last 50 years. As many of you know, I've only been here about 13 years, so that's more where my knowledge is. And then most of the time when we have tea and coffee afterwards, all the staff will be here and sort of showing some of the amazing work they're doing. So you'll get to interact with them, which is what I want this all to be about, a celebration of their work. So we did find the original memo. I was looking at the photocopy thinking, I wonder what condition that paper's in. Thank goodness they digitized it. So the press release in February of 1970, which was talking about a grant from the Council on Library Resources to bring in scientific equipment to the Library of Congress. And this was really fascinating because this is where they're talking about there are a whole range of different types of materials, and we're still having trouble. I love it, keeping abreast of how we deal with this. I'm thinking, well, I guess it's job security for all of us in preservation. And they also mentioned William Barrow. As some of you may know, we have the Barrow collection here. It's part of our reference collection, so that's phenomenal to actually have that here once we found it all. And then just a range of issues that continue to be a challenge with that. I love the fact that they want the program to be national in scope, with the thought that we really are doing this to work with colleagues elsewhere, and that we're going to draw vitality from the interaction with the greatest collection of printed materials in the world. Also the fact that they're talking about that collaborative interaction between people, everyone working in the area. So we have all had a wonderful chuckle about some of the original images from what the lab used to look like back in the 1970s. Some of the equipment, some of us are still not quite sure what this was, but I particularly loved the early computers. And then this one I loved because the dear old fold testers, MIT fold testers, and guess what, we're still using them today. I suspect there may be one or two original in there, but it's phenomenal to think some things change and some things stay the same, which is really fascinating. And then moving on to sort of, the new instrumentation, from very expensive desktop to the portables, to historic recipes, to the imaging, sort of a number of the areas that you're going to see more of as we move further forward today. And so we have physical, chemical, optical, and aging labs. I always talk about the upstairs and the downstairs lab, which for some of you who've seen Downton Abbey will get the reference. But it's amazing that we've got those capabilities and we have that range of instrumentation to work with and to do the analysis, as Jake so rightly pointed out. I wanted to just do a few acknowledgements. I'm trying to stay away from names because I know I will leave people out. But from when I arrived in 2007, there was a big push to redo the preservation labs, and Deanna Markham, Bob Dysart, and Diane van der Rijden were incredibly supportive of that. Mark Sweeney also, when I started saying things about, we have instruments that are 12 years old, and do you think we can put like a thing in the budget for about $150,000? And he didn't flinch too much. But my colleagues, the preservation chiefs, curatorial staff, researchers, PRTD, conservation, all of our colleagues in LC are just so important for how we make this work and what makes us excited about our work as well. What I'd like to do is hand over to Kathleen Smith, who's the Director of Communications at the Council on Library and Information Resources, which is the now CLIR. And it was so exciting, because I've been doing a lot of work with CLIR, to realise, in fact, that they had the prescience back in 1970 to actually fund and move forward. And as you'll hear from Kathleen's presentation, LC and CLIR still work very closely together. So I'm going to hand on over to her to give some summary of that.
Thank you, Fenella. It's such a pleasure to be here today for this celebration and to be invited to talk a little bit about CLIR's early involvement with the library and the creation of the Preservation Research and Testing Division. The Council on Library Resources, CLIR's precursor organization, came into being in September 1956. By coincidence, 1 week after IBM released the first commercial computer with a hard drive. The computer was bigger than a refrigerator and weighed about a ton, and the hard drive stored a staggering 5 megabytes of data, about the size of an MP3 music file today. It's hard to know whether the Council's founders could have imagined the profound impact that this would have on libraries within just a few decades. But I'm getting ahead of myself. In its first year of operation, the Council awarded just 4 grants. One of them was to the scientist William Barrow for research into the causes of book stock deterioration and possible remedies. At that time, libraries worldwide were witnessing the embrittlement of books printed just decades earlier. Barrow connected paper embrittlement to the acids and other elements in the production of wood pulp paper that started in the mid-19th century. He asserted that unless action was taken, few of the books published in the first half of the 20th century would be usable in another 100 years. To enable more extensive and comprehensive scientific research on book preservation, in 1961, the Council established the W.J. Barrow Research Library and Laboratory in Richmond. Early work focused on paper permanence, deacidification, book bindings, and the effects of temperature and humidity on book longevity. The Council funded the lab until 1977, a decade after Barrow's death. But getting back to the early 60s, while Barrow's research already led a handful of publishers to start experimenting with acid-free paper, such publications were rare, and libraries found themselves spending growing portions of their budgets on microfilming at-risk materials. It was clear that a national plan was needed for sharing the burden. And in 1960, the Association for Research Libraries appointed a committee on the preservation of research library materials to develop such a plan. The first task was to estimate the size of the problem. The council commissioned the state librarian of Virginia, Randolph Church, to design a method for sampling, and Triangle Research Associates to estimate the number of books that would need attention and by when. The report from the investigation estimated that 57% of the titles in the National Union catalog, comprising some 3 billion pages, were at risk. There were two main approaches to addressing the problem of embrittlement. One was to deacidify the originals and store them at reduced temperatures. But this was relatively expensive, so not practical for entire collections. Another, as noted earlier, was microfilm, which was less expensive and allowed for ease of duplication and access, though microfilm was the format that most scholars loved to despise. A council-funded study by Gordon Williams, then director of the Midwest Interlibrary Center, which later became the Center for Research Libraries, weighed the advantages and drawbacks of these approaches and also identified photocopying as a possible solution for access. Acknowledging that redundancy of effort was expensive, Williams recommended that there be one national agency to represent research libraries, assuring the physical preservation for as long as possible of at least one example of every deteriorating record, and that agency would make copies of those records available to any library that needed them. For years, the Library of Congress had been segregating its badly deteriorated books into a brittle books collection. By the late 1960s, it was also exploring the administrative and bibliographic means for assuring the preservation of books for ongoing use in the research community. But problems of implementing preservation solutions remained. For one thing, there was still no inexpensive method for deacidifying books, and environmental storage conditions needed to be specified. In 1967, the library appointed Fraser Poole as preservation officer to organize and develop a comprehensive preservation program that would serve the country, and planning began for the Preservation Research Office. 3 years later, the council awarded $95,000 to the Library of Congress to equip the new laboratory, and by June 1972, it was up and running. Today, you'll hear from my colleagues here about the lab's trajectory and this stunning array of activity through the decades that followed. But I'd like to reflect for a few moments on the council's trajectory and the broader preservation environment in which we find ourselves. Through the 70s and early 80s, the council continued to invest heavily in preservation, but its efforts took a new turn in the mid-80s with the formation of the Commission on Preservation and Access under the leadership of Patricia Batten. Concentrating on the Brittle Books program, the Commission sought to expand awareness of the issue, strengthen access systems, conduct more fact-finding studies, and most importantly, obtain congressional funding for a nationwide preservation microfilming program. In 1997, members of the Commission joined with the staff from the library and other organizations to testify before Congress at a special hearing on the Brittle Books program. As a result, the appropriations bill for FY 1989 gave NEH $12.5 million, of which $8 million went to instituting a 20-year program for microfilming 3 million endangered volumes. In the end, just over 1 million volumes were microfilmed, far short of the goal. This was in part because of budget cuts at NEH, but also because digitization was becoming an attractive alternative to microfilming. Well before the Brittle Books program ended, libraries were converting significant portions of their preservation budgets to digitization. But digitization brought a new set of preservation concerns. And in late 1994, the Commission joined with a research libraries group to create the Task Force on Digital Archiving. Its groundbreaking report in 1996, written by Don Waters and John Garrett, noted, if we are effectively to preserve for future generations the portion of this rapidly expanding corpus of information in digital form that represents our cultural record, we need to understand the costs of doing so, and we need to commit ourselves technically, legally, economically, and organizationally to the full dimensions of this task. Meanwhile, discussions had been taking place about the feasibility of collaborating to create a distributed, open digital library. With this aim in mind, in 1995, the Commission joined 12 academic libraries, the Library of Congress, NARA, and the New York Public Library in forming the Digital Library Federation, and the Commission served as DLF's administrative home. That same year, the decision was made to merge the Commission on Preservation Access, which had started as a program of the Council, back into the Council to form a new single organization, the Council on Library and Information Resources, or CLIR. The merger was completed in 1997 under the leadership of Deanna Markham. The challenges of digital preservation and access have remained central to CLIR's efforts over the past quarter century. Today, CLIR's Digital Library Federation continues to grow with more than 190 members, a vibrant annual forum, and 12 working groups tackling issues from born digital access to digital scholarship. CLIR currently awards some $4 million annually to digitize hidden special collections and archives of high scholarly value, and $1 million annually to digitally reformat valuable audiovisual recordings at high risk of loss. We've also collaborated with the library on more than a decade of studies and publications focused on the challenges of recorded sound preservation as mandated by the National Recording Preservation Act of 2000. We continue a robust publications program, and in late 2019 launched a podcast, Material Memory, which explores the effects of our changing world from digital technologies to the climate crisis on our ability to access the record of our shared humanity. Through stories and interviews, we examine the critical role that libraries, archives, museums, and other public institutions play in keeping cultural memory alive. Finally, this spring, we will join our project partners in announcing a new digital library of the Middle East platform that will support the Federation of Digitized Middle Eastern Materials from institutions around the world. While much of this activity is focused on digitizing for preservation and access, we've been fortunate to learn more about the technologies, physical and digital, that allow us to ask new questions of old materials, thanks to the work of the Preservation Research and Testing Division. For nearly 2 decades, CLIR has run the Mellon Fellowships for Dissertation Research in Original Sources, which promote creative approaches to original source research. In 2011, as a new aspect of the program, we created a CLIR Library of Congress Fellowship to support original source dissertation research. This fellowship allows a PhD student to work in the PRTD using tools and equipment that would not otherwise be available to them to analyze source materials in new ways. And I'm so delighted to see Marlena Cravens here today, whose work she can describe over at the table afterwards. She is the current CLIR LC fellow. While on the topic of CLIR's ongoing collaboration with the PRTD, I'd be remiss if I didn't note that the division's chief, Fenella France, who is a CLIR Presidential Fellow, will start her tenure as a CLIR board member this spring. We are so delighted. The challenges that our community faces seem to get increasingly complex as we steward rapidly growing physical and digital collections at the same time. We struggle to preserve not just the material aspects, but also their significance and relationships to one another. With often scarce resources and an impending climate crisis, the risks of loss to our intellectual and cultural heritage grow more dire with each passing year. Despite all that we are facing, the consciousness of the need for strong leadership, international collaboration, and collective action to address preservation challenges is as strong as ever. The world looks to the library for its direction and example. The achievements and talents of the people of this division, and most of all, the generous spirit with which you share your talents with others, are making a real difference. We look forward to continuing to support and celebrate your work for years to come. Congratulations, and thank you.
And for those of you who haven't been on the CLIR website, there's a lot of resources there, and a lot of new podcasts and things. So then and now, we had a loop beforehand, and I'll put it on again when we finished sort of some of the interesting photos. But just some of the changes, particularly over the last 15, 20 years, that have been coming into play. There's a strong move towards the materials analysis and an acceptance that we have a very diverse range. My colleagues from conservation already know the diverse range of materials we have. But I remember when I first came to the library and people saying, so what are you going to do there? I mean, they have like paper and some photographs, and there was just a complete misunderstanding of the richness of the collections. And I think that sort of seeing the collections as a range of formats and all the commensurate issues that relate to that, those specific challenges, paper, parchment, adhesives, magnetic tape were called out in the original memo in the 70s, but we're working a lot with musical instruments, with sound recordings, digital storage media, all of these different ways of preserving our information. And I think that focus too on the original object as opposed to the facsimile is something that we all feel incredibly strongly about, that we couldn't often pull out some of the interesting information we find with the new techniques if we hadn't preserved the original. So we've been working a lot, thinking about a more integrated and collaborative approach to research. Some of the instrument changes that we've found have been really interesting. The instrument size has been, I think, one of the main things. Andrew and I were talking about an atomic force microscope, which used to be the size of my office, and he came in a year or so ago and he's like, I can buy a portable one. And I said, a portable AFM, right? And it's you'll see it on the table. It's like this big, and it's like, it was a little bit much for my brain to comprehend going from a room size to this portable instrument, but that's been really amazing. And then thinking about the limits of detection, we can detect so much more, which means we have to up our game in terms of understanding what are we actually seeing here, what does it mean in terms of the material changes and the degradation. Another interesting area has been working with manufacturers to try and sort of customize or make sure we've got open architecture instrumentation, and Lynn's done a lot of work with this so that we can move away from sampling as much as possible and try to see how we can safely analyze on the object itself. And as you'll also see, the portability has been a huge area where we really felt we couldn't justify spending hundreds of thousands of dollars for a desk, for a lab instrument, lab-grade instrument, when in fact we got 80% of what we needed in terms of the information from a portable instrument that could walk to the collections and makes conservators and curators extremely happy that they don't have to walk down to the lab with all of those materials. So non-invasive in terms of not doing any interaction with the collection has been a big push for all of those instruments, and you're going to see many of them shortly. And then thinking about the techniques to sort of assure there's no impact on collection items. Many of you in the audience have seen changes over time as instruments were brought in, and then 10 years later we look at the damage that we can now see from that instrument. So we had a really huge push to sort of look at, can we absolutely make certain that with a new technique or the way we're using that instrument, that we're not actually causing any harm or any change to the collection item? So as part of that approach, particularly over the last few years, we've really looked at a more integrated, structured way of making best use of our time and resources and answering all of the questions that come out. We usually start with a baseline imaging using the spectral imaging system to sort of get a mapping of what different materials are in the object. And from there, we do a range of inorganic and organic analyses to sort of build up that deep learning at specific point sources that we've mapped out from the original object. Using reference samples has been a very large part of that move towards non-invasive and being able to expand our capabilities, because if we don't have a reference known of what we're working with, then it's very hard to tell us what that actually is. And so the reference collection that I'll talk about soon has been a big part of working with that. So the slide that always has more words than you can ever read is just a quick overview of much of what you're going to see. So the spectral imaging in reflectance, transmitted, raking, Fourier transform infrared to look at the organic component, the X-ray fluorescence to look at the inorganic, the fibre optic reflectance spectrometer sort of gives us more information about dyes and pigments, Raman spectroscopy. So all of these different techniques are being used to complement each other and build up the picture of what we need to know about that particular object. And it's also opened up for us to, rather than just push towards a specific instrument, really engage with our colleagues about what is the question and how do we need to be extending and expanding the utilisation of the instruments that we have or customising in some way. So we have what I affectionately term, and I still haven't come up with a different term, the GO team, which is what instruments can we put on a cart and wheel somewhere for those instruments and those people to take those techniques. And Megan and I came back from Ireland a week ago, where we took the spectral imaging system, and some of our colleagues in PRTD said, so you could either wheel it across to the Jefferson building for the first time, but you're taking it to Ireland for the first time, like, to show its capabilities? And we're like, yep. And please talk to Megan more about that. It was a phenomenal experience. And so coming back to the reference collection, we have an extensive range of materials and we're building on this. And this is to replicate what we have in our collection, but we can then do destructive testing on. So the Barrow collection from the Barrow Labs, which Kathleen mentioned, we have those 1,000 books from 1500 to 1900. The best fun is when new staff come and I say, you're allowed to take a page out of this book, and you're like, really? I can take a page out of this book and destroy it? So it's that interesting crossover of still having that physical reaction to the collection item. And Andrew will be talking about some of the information we've looked at from the Barrow collection, which goes back to the original research and how we've been building on doing those analyses again over time. We have a lot of 20th century, 21st century books, the reference papers from various projects which are customised, and we have also been using it a lot as a training research experience for new staff who want to be cross-trained in different instruments. We have historic and modern colorants and pigments, and Cindy's been taking the lead on that. If I'm ever somewhere else overseas, I usually get this little email that's like, do you think you could drop into this place and bring this one back? And a really interesting project for with a number of the PRTD staff of looking at historic recipes and recreating them. The tappy fibres FRIL, the Fibre Reference Imaging Library. We've got an extensive range of parchments, which we're starting to work with parchment makers to bring in with different treatments, sound recordings and storage media. So these are all building up our collection. And as we build up those reference materials, we're now keeping the originals, but also doing some retesting of naturally and accelerated age, so we can get that baseline understanding information about them. Some of the reference materials that we have, as you can see, the barrow books, which are individually boxed, magnetic tapes. We even have a goat skin that came from Israel, pigments, damaged books, fibres, you name it, it's there. And so as part of that, and the big move towards trying to make that information more accessible and available, which you also heard from Kathleen is a focus too with the access. Class D, the Centre for Library Information and Linked Analytical Scientific Samples Digital, the library is very good at acronyms, and this is all of the data that we've collected about all of our reference materials, which is expanding into a way of collecting data and making it accessible about all of the analyses we do on collection items. And from this, we've also worked very carefully with the digital formats to make sure that they are sustainable, and then layered another level on with Andrew Forsberg of what that visualization of this type of information might start to look at. Why is this interesting? Because if we just take an image on, this is a high magnification image of a piece of paper and with the scanning electron microscope, some of that information is embedded in the image, but it's not extractable. So what do? We want to extract from the instrument itself all of the metadata about how that image was captured, what the elements are, how we map those, and then how we captured that information. So all of these different types of information are being collected to be made accessible to our national and international colleagues. And we have been working studiously, and Amanda has taken the lead on working with some of the reworking of this database structure. And so again, you can see just the complexity of the relationships between the object-based focus, and then as we start to add in other types of analyses. So if we have a research project, we have 5 different samples, 12 different analyses, then we age them. So you can imagine how just the bulk of things expands immensely as we move forward with that. And I wanted to focus on shared expertise and thinking about the internal and external partnerships. Our colleagues in conservation are, just phenomenal to work with in terms of that knowledge they have as conservators, so that we can work with them. And without that strong interaction, we wouldn't be able to do a lot of the work that we do. And so I just wanted to thank you all with that. And also for the curatorial divisions, who now, instead of being afraid of what is a scary instrument that you might do and take to my collection and do something to, now feel comfortable about saying, I have this kind of weird question, and that becomes a conversation and an ongoing collaborative, iterative process of that shared knowledge, because if we did the research in isolation, it would not actually have that richness and that depth of knowledge and expansive. And a lot we're doing with local and national and international colleagues. Just a selection, so particularly in Washington, D.C., we've been working a lot more extensively with National Archives, with NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, the Smithsonian, National Gallery of Art, the University of Delaware, the ongoing one with collections demography with University College London. We've been working with the Getty Institute, some round robin ones, a number of those. I just wanted to give like a short selection of the diverse range of, from forensics to academics to other national labs. And in terms of research grants, we've been really very excited about the work that we've been able to do with some of these additional labs. With the National Centre for Preservation Technology and Training, we got some early imaging support for as we built up the spectral imaging lab. National Endowment for the Humanities, as Jake mentioned, the Glass at Risk project. IMLS, we worked with the University of South Carolina looking at magnetic tape degradation. And I'll finish up by talking about our current Mellon Foundation grant. Interns and fellowships has been an amazing way for us to expand what we can do. When sometimes over the years, when staff sizes have reduced and expanded, I mean the size of the number of staff, not the staff sizes, that did not come out well. So Junior Fellows is one we're always delighted to be able to participate in, and then the Preservation Science Internship, which is an unpaid fellowship, but we're getting a lot of people from local universities, as Kathleen mentioned, the CLIR Fellowship for Dissertation, Research and Original Sources, and we've also been delighted to have a postdoc in data curation through CLIR. GW Forensic Science Masters Program, they often come and do their research projects with us. The SEED program, which is looking at underprivileged high school students, is just so exciting and rewarding. Haku, there's so many different programs that we enjoy working with, and I do want to again take my hat off to my staff who we pretty much learnt that do not anticipate getting much of anything done over summer, because working with the students, which is incredibly rewarding, but does take a lot of time and effort. So that's another, with support from our directors, has been a phenomenal way for us to sort of look at diversity and expand what we can actually do with training possibilities and reaching out. And I struggled with this slide because as I started looking back through all of the tops and the symposia that we had done, I got a little bit tired. But just a couple of examples of some of the bigger ones. And then, you know, we've done everything from Igor Link to musical instruments to terahertz to UNESCO. It's amazing what we have actually worked on with colleagues. And also training workshops. We've started building up that, working with and sharing our knowledge for people in a range of different areas through chemometrics, Rare Book School, imaging science and technology, so expanding that scope of how we can share our knowledge and work with different groups and audiences. The data science and visualization has been a really exciting area where we started thinking more, when you saw when I was talking about the new approach where we start with the spectral imaging and then we do the deep dive down. So how do we start to bring all of this work together in a way that actually allows us to engage with the information and make it available to other people? And so I wondered where did this come from? So we're talking, and this is a block book from 1470, we're talking to a curator who's like, well, I want to see how it's made in terms of how it's printed, and then what is that? So we do the XRF and it comes up it's copper, so we're like, well, it could be verdigris or malachite. So with the 4s now we can see that it's actually verdigris, not malachite, and then we're asked, well, what's the sizing? So we come back with the gelatin sizing. So all of those, how do we start to think about a more exciting way rather than having to read like a 20-page report, which you know is going to send you to sleep by page 5, even though you're interested in all of the graphs. And how can we actually do that more functionally? So we started working with the International Image Interoperability Framework, IIIF, and the Mirador Viewer, and thinking about how people currently engage with that. So one of the exciting ones, which I will direct you to ask Megan and Chris about, since they did all the work on this, which is a letter from Alexander Hamilton, and using this platform, we can now start to put all of the information about it, show how we've worked with extracting the text from under a redacted component, and bring out what the original transcription from that was. And I will let you ask Megan and Chris why the son redacted this from his parents' letters. And one of the interesting things going on further was then how do we start to engage and input both curatorial and bring together curatorial and scientific data, because we get so passionate and excited about what we do, we want other people to see that and engage with it. So using this platform, we can now start to, for this one, bring in with the information about the analyses we're doing, work with a curator to add in annotations about curatorial information in that, and then start to think about how we can layer in the scientific data. So now we have a way of sort of adding in all of the different spectral imaging data that you can click through and look at, some of the processing. Because I'm lazy, I had Andrew do a slider so you can just click through that more easily and engage with it. You can zoom in from the platform. So a much more effective way to engage with the type of information that we're putting there and putting it out into the digital realm. And then when we start to look at scientific analyses, we can zoom in on that, and for the geeky scientist, of course, who wants to see all of the different graphs, we can now link through those as well. We added in and started thinking about what we wanted to do in terms of high-level metadata and how this could be more exciting for curators who might not be excited about all the scientific graphs that we are excited about. So if you hover over, for example, verdigris, because if they didn't know what it was, you can get the simple, this is a copper-containing pigment, or we can actually use true linked open data and link to the Wikidata or the Getty site to actually link those different websites together. So these are things we've been doing even into the scientific data, where for reflectance we didn't want to redo all of this. You can click on that and you get to the IUPAC Gold Books, which is the original chemical terms. So these are ways of sort of starting to pull all of that information together. I wanted to wrap up with the current project we have with the Mellon Grant, which is assessing the physical condition of the National Collection, because it starts to bring together a lot of these initiatives and approaches that you're seeing. So this was a grant for $540,000 for 40 months, about 3 years, and allowed us to bring 2 additional staff members, well, people into PRTD, Andrew Forsberg and Robin Hodgkins, as the researchers on that project. And this is to really start to look at and think about what is the, coming back in a wonderful full circle to Kathleen's comments about brittleness. How do we know what the current state of the National Collection is, and how can we use our facilities and our knowledge to work with people to understand that more effectively? So we have 5 partners in 5 different regions of America, and they are allowing us to take a 10mm strip off of one general collection book, and we can analyse the same 500 volumes from all the partners to see how alike or not alike they are. And we wanted to really think about, can we get information about the environment and usage in terms of what we're seeing with the differences between these materials. And we're just starting to look to see what, of course, as you know, many institutions don't have a lot of easily accessible environmental and circulation data, but we're trying to fold that in where we're at. And please see Andrew and Robin. I just wanted to sort of give a bit of a background about this. So over the last 5 or 6 years, we've really looked at how do we miniaturize test methods. So from Cindy, it's like, can we do like a micro pH rather than taking 2.5 pages, taking that down to 3 hole punches, to Andrew when he first arrived, and I was like, so how small can we get a sample for size exclusion chromatography to look at the molecular weight? And we've really minimised the size of samples from all of these so that we could, from this 10mm strip, do size exclusion chromatography to look at the molecular weight, mini tensile testing, mini acidity, looking at the ultraviolet, UV vis, and infrared. Additional tests we wanted to do was the dear old double fold, and I'm going to leave that for people at the tables to talk about, because I'm sure there will be some wonderfully animated discussion. And then thinking about other things like the spot test, how subjective or objective could they be? How can we start to correlate those? And Kelly and Eric will talk to you about what we affectionately call book sniffing. And how can we start to go from this now huge volume of data that we're getting from these, all of these different methodologies, to create a reproducible, useful test that people can use in the stacks that really does give them a good feeling about what that condition of their collections are. And so what we're working on this, and if anyone's interested, please let us know, because we'd be happy to send out papers to have people try the test method to see, is it useful, is it horrible, did you like it or did you not? But it's got to be inexpensive, it needs to be quick, it needs to be effective, and these are the things we're looking at, as well as the objectivity. What does the identical look like? So one thing we started doing was taking pictures of each shipment that came in of the same 80 to 100 books, because the next 5 slides are the same books, top left across, from each institution. And I think you'll quickly see that they don't bear a lot of resemblance to each other. I mean, these are actually the same books. Then, to make life very interesting, we see up to 4 different types of paper in one book. Identical is not very identical. This is one book, top to bottom, with different types of paper in it. So what we're really trying to look at now is what's the impact of that different paper type on the qualities of that, because I'm sure at the time when they printed it, it looked exactly the same colour and responded. They thought it was the same. And some of the really interesting information in terms of how people are dealing with this, and coming back to that stack test, is thinking about people will do the visual assessment of what they do. And so what we've gone through is visually how do people think about this information and look at the assessment of the binding and the text block itself. We're focusing mainly on the text block. And then as we start to look at this a little bit more, thinking about the text block, what are the 4 categories that make the most sense in terms of damage? So going from actual physical damage like broken corners of the actual paper itself, to things that could be structural like text block separation, the visual, which is always very subjective, and then things that happen to the volume that may have happened after the case, not necessarily part of the inherent properties of the paper. Now, as Andrew Forsberg has so amazingly done, we can now extract out those specific key components that relate to the visual assessment, and then start to look at what is the pH, what is the tensile testing, what are the spot tests, what are all the different infrared and fibre optic reflectance spectroscopy analyses, and the one I really love, the chromaticity diagram, so you can see if it's going yellow, which direction the colour is going in. So this is all now part of this huge volume of work that we're working on, that really starts to inform us to know more about where we're at with the collection information. So I want to finish by thanking everyone, and I'll invite Kathleen and Jake back up to the podium if you have questions, but I really wanted to spend most of the time for you to be able to engage with the staff and see their phenomenal work and what they've been doing. So thank you so much for listening. Do we have any questions? I know it's post-lunch on a day after the holidays.
Thank you. Very fascinating, very cutting edge work that you guys are doing. Just a couple basic questions. Is the PRTD actually part of the Library of Congress?
Yes, Preservation Research and Testing Division is within the Preservation Directorate, and there's 4 divisions. There's Preservation Research and Testing, the Conservation Division, who work with special collections, and some of my colleagues are here, Binding and Collections CLIR, and Preservation Reformatting. So those 4 divisions make the Preservation Directorate, and Jake is the director of the whole Preservation Directorate. So, without further ado, I will let my staff scurry back to their tables and open up for questions. Thank you.